Bruce Plourde, American Studies. What do you know about Marxism?
I don't know anything.
Would you like me to explain it to you?
Yes.
Karl Marx was a German historian who looked back into the history of the Western world and determined that civilizations advance or decline according to the economics of that society. In his examination of history, Marx reveals that the quality of people's lives depends upon how a society makes use of its wealth. He saw the 19th century as a marvelous time for human civilization. People were no longer tied to the idea that religion told them who they were or where they belonged, or that people had a set path in life because they belonged to a particular family, or because they didn't belong to a particular family. Religion and social hierarchies had much less power to control people's lives, and a new spirit of social equality became apparent for the masses. The miracle that was largely responsible for this social transformation was industrialization. With industrialization in the Western world, new forms of power were unleashed. These forms of power ran factories and put everybody to work. They led to new forms of transportation, including railroads and steamships. They led to new forms of communication, including the telegraph. The world was suddenly interconnected in ways it had never been before. Industrialization meant huge factories, it meant lots of people working, and it meant the creation of vast new wealth. All of this wealth could be seen in the new roads, the new buildings and cities, and the new transportation centers. It could also be seen in the mansions of the new millionaires. Marx saw that people who had capital, or wealth, were the ones who started the new businesses, and they were the ones that profited most from it, simply by virtue of the fact that they had capital to begin with. In fact, so much new wealth was changing society's social structure. The capitalists, those who had the wealth, were using their wealth to create even more wealth. The people who had been in the middle class, or what Marx called the bourgeoisie, were gradually reduced to the level of the workers, or the proletariat. Marx observed that despite vast new wealth being produced, 10% of the population had the most of it, while 90% had what was left. The 10% were the capitalists, and the 90% were the bourgeoisie, who were becoming poorer year by year and slipping downward toward the level of the proletariat. What results is a society that is striated into classes that are defined by money. Because capitalism is not a moral philosophy, it doesn't care who takes advantage of opportunity and who suffers injustice. Capitalism is driven by the idea of the market and the marketplace, where everything is determined. We think of Wall Street as a place where the marketplace works. Much of our economics are derived from the activity of such places where commodities are bought, sold, and exchanged. But in a capitalist society, as Marx tells us, everything is a commodity. Everything can be bought, sold, or traded. We might think of the basics of life, such as lumber, coal, and orange juice, as commodities that are bought and sold on a vast scale. But in such an economic system, people themselves become objects for sale. The way that the bourgeoisie participates in such a system and the proletariat is through their labor. They don't have access to great amounts of capital, so they survive by selling their labor. Sometimes they survive by selling their silence, or their virtue, or their vote. Such a system, with its large imbalance between the wealthy and the poor, leads to a powerful class that dominates everyone and everything. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. Marx believed that people could work together toward a more equal society once they knew of the system and how it determined so much of their lives. He was a historian and a philosopher, but he also believed that the exchange of ideas would never do anything to change the world. He believed that ideas could transform the world for the better, and he also believed that the lower classes could start a revolution that would lead to fairness and equality in every aspect of human life. Marx branded the term socialism as an economic system that created fairness and equality for everyone. He wrote a pamphlet with his colleague, Friedrich Engels, called the Communist Manifesto, and in it he outlined the societal structure in which everyone gave according to their ability and received according to their need. In such a system, people would not suffer because of their lack of capital. Under socialism, everyone would work for the common good and receive what they needed so that they and their families could prosper. Marx intended this work as a critique of the political structure of Western society, but we can take those same ideas and relate them to literature. When a literary work mentions some aspect of economics, or when a literary work points out some living conditions that are related to economics, then we can apply Marxism to those works of literature, and we can create a richer reading of that work through the lens of Marxism. The key concepts of Marxism include capital, or the accumulation of wealth. Capitalism, then, is the system of economic exchange that leads to inequality in social conditions. The market is the term used for the forum in which economic values are determined. Those values can be applied to stuff, or commodities, or they can be applied to non-tangible things. A commodity is anything that can be bought, sold, or traded. People at the top of this chain are the capitalists, because they are the minority who hold the largest share of the world's wealth. People in the middle are the bourgeoisie, and they comprise the middle class. People at the lowest rung of the capitalist ladder are the proletariat, the workers. One way to distinguish the different levels is considering the amount of labor that is performed. The lowest class has only its labor, so as a class, these people, the proletariat, end up doing the most labor for the least rewards. The bourgeoisie has to maintain its work to earn a living, but because capitalists have the wealth, they do not perform any of the labor, or very little. Marx believed that if the workers became aware of this economic disparity and the reasons behind it, they could take control of the means of production. Having control of the means of production would then lead to a society which would create the need for everyone working for a living and everyone receiving an equitable share of their production. So, as with any field of study, we can take the principles of Marxism and apply them to works of literature wherever we want to highlight economics or people living in a community or any system that relies on inequalities.
And that's what you need to know about Marxism.
That's interesting.
Great.